All right. Can everybody hear me all right? Sweet. So I'm really excited to be here, but I'm just going to get started by going through. I want you guys to imagine that you're, in the grocery store, right? So you're in the grocery store, and it's come time to go to checkout, right? So you get in line for checkout, and you end up striking a conversation up with the person in front of you, the shopper in front of you, and you get to that part in the small talk where they ask you, well, what do you do for a living? And I think all of us in this room kind of stutter when someone asks us that question, when someone random, in a random situation asks us that question, because we're not really sure what to say, right? And so finally you decide to just say, oh, well, I'm an entomologist. You decide to go out on a limb and just say that. And they enthusiastically respond with, oh my gosh, I know exactly what that is. That's so cool. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware in this room, but that situation has never happened in human history. Nobody ever knows what entomology is. So today I'd like to talk about why I think that might be the case. Why do insects make up 80% of all animal life on this planet, but nobody knows what entomology is or that us entomologists exist? So a big thing in the current many years is science communication, and modern science communication, I would say, was really pioneered by these men here. Of course, Sir David Attenborough, Steve Irwin, and Bill Nye the Science Guy, right? These are amazing men who do amazing things for science communication. Now, what do all of these men have in common, you might be asking? And that is that they were all on cable TV, right? And in case you weren't aware, cable TV is dying. So the peak year of cable TV was in the year 2000 with 68 million subscribers in that year. Now in 2024, it's down to 22 million subscribers, so it's cut in less than half since then. So where did all of these viewers go? They didn't just disappear, right? They had to go somewhere. We're still consuming media more than ever before, so where did all of them go? And the clear answer is online sources. And one of those online sources is, of course, YouTube. And so they've gone to many other places other than YouTube, but YouTube is just an example that I'm familiar with. And so right now there's an estimated 246 million users on YouTube. So I'm just using YouTube as an example, but they've also gone to other places like podcasts, which I'll talk about in a minute, but podcasts, blogs, YouTube, Instagram, social media, all those places, those are filling the role that YouTube used to have in science communication. So really, YouTube and online content is our new tool. It's our new TV. So I'm sure you walked in here not knowing you would get a full mass media course, but alas, here we are. So a little bit about me. My name's Bradon Coy. That is little 4-year-old me. I've always been obsessed with bugs. I started a nonprofit organization called Lil Dudes Insect Academy, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second, but I've always really loved bugs, so I always wanted to be an entomologist, in the field, in the rainforest, tromping around, doing all the crazy stuff. But then when I was 7, I was diagnosed with a neuromuscular condition, and so I was forced to kind of reevaluate where my place was in entomology. And so I quickly realized that I loved to explain things and teach people about bugs. So that's when I started Lil Dudes Insect Academy, and that is a nonprofit that I started, and under that umbrella is the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast and YouTube channel, which I really enjoy, and that's a big passion of mine that I'm working on right now. My eventual goal in the future is to create resources, courses, and curriculum that I wish that I had when I was growing up as a kid. So that's going to be curriculum, resources and courses for K through 12 teachers and students, because I think that's a big gap in resources. You've got little kid stuff, and then you've got advanced textbooks for college, right? So I think that's why there is so few entomologists, is because, number one, people don't know about it, and number two, there aren't resources for that age group. So this is a picture from my very first bug class that I hosted when I was 11 or 12. We did some pinning together, but now I'm more so into the online stuff. So I do this stuff, it's still really fun, but my future, I think, is more so on the online stuff and the curriculum and things like that. So Lil Dudes Insect Academy, we have a booth in the exhibit hall. If you haven't come over and meet me. I'd love to meet and talk with every one of you, and I'd love to have you guys on the podcast. I'm always looking for guests for that. It's a great way to share what you're working on and the research that you do. It's a really fun time. But I also forgot I'm also a student at University of Florida in entomology. So I'm getting my degree in entomology, and I'm really enjoying that. So into the bulk of what I wanted to talk about, and that is, do us entomologists have a place in this modern science communication world? Is there a place for us online in this fast-paced, crazy climate? And starting off, you kind of have these questions, right? Like hesitations as to why you shouldn't do it, why you shouldn't share whatever it is online about your interests or your passions. And everything I'm going to talk about applies to anything online, but I'm most familiar with a podcast and YouTube. So that applies to blog or social media or anything you choose to create. But that first doubt that I hear a lot of people and myself have is, oh, well, I'm just not interesting enough. And I have this question from people who are interested in being on the podcast. They say, oh, I'm not interesting enough, or I'm not experienced enough. And to that, I would somewhat sarcastically agree with, no, well, nobody's as interesting as bugs are, but, I digress. So this is just like a really clear example of the crazy stuff that goes on online. These crazy trends happen online, the most stupid videos ever. I'm sure you guys have seen those silly videos where you get ready with me, and it's literally just someone like putting on makeup and like getting ready for their day and explaining some story or something they're doing. The craziest one I saw recently was get unready with me. So they were taking off their makeup and explaining the story. It's like so silly. So really what I go back to is if those will get millions of views, some really good and high quality and awesome videos about bugs will definitely get lots of attention online. And I have examples of that in a minute. But there's also a very delicate balance to this. I'm sure all of you have taken some sort of science communication or public speaking classes in the past, but there's a very delicate balance of how to communicate this to non-experts. So a really great example of this that I found is a past guest of the show, Dr. Derek Hennon, posted or released this fantastic paper that I'd encourage all of you to read, but it's really great. It's a revision of the Wilsoni species group in the millipede genus Nanaria from Chamberlain, 1918. So it's a fantastic paper. I would encourage you all to go read it if you haven't already. But you kind of need to comb through these large amounts of information and determine what the general public really wants to know from this stuff. Because, all of us in this room know all the newest things in entomology. We know all of the newest advances and discoveries, but the common public doesn't, because nobody is translating that information to them. So what does the general public really want to know from this publication? Well, they'd obviously want to know that he named one of the species after Taylor Swift, right? So that is an example of how to kind of comb through something and determine what is most interesting to the general public. So to summarize, takeaway number one is you have a really great story to tell. If I can do it, you can definitely do it too. I started when I was in high school, so I didn't have any formal training at that time in entomology or biology. Now I'm getting my undergraduate degree in entomology at the University of Florida, but when I started, I was just a kid who really liked bugs. So finally, you are almost as interesting as bugs are. So you are interesting enough to share about that. So hesitation number two, doubt number two. Do people even want to consume bug content? Is there even a desire out there? And to that, I will preface this by saying that I believe humans are innately interested in the weird and bizarre. It's why horror movies are so popular, they can't look away. It's like watching a train wreck, right? So I believe humans are innately interested in the weird and unsightly, Exhibit A being the return of skinny jeans and millennial men. Yeah, I don't need to say any more about that, but people are interested in this kind of stuff. So just a scroll through YouTube, you'll see these crazy videos. Stung by a bullet ant. I'm sure lots of you have seen this video, but another one is 30 most dangerous insects in the world. These are obviously hyperbolic, crazy things, and I'll get back to these in just a second, but if you'll notice, these have insane numbers of views on YouTube. And I host my podcast on YouTube also, so I have some experience on YouTube, but 2 million views, 9.5 million views, 63 million views. Like, it's unreal, some of these. So people are obviously interested in this. And I'm looking through some of the feedback of my content, really great comments. This second one is my favorite. It was on a video that I made about keeping bees as someone in a wheelchair. And it says, "Thank you, I use a wheelchair to get around, and I can only stand for a very short time. I've always wanted to keep bees, but I thought I was excluded." And this is what gets me excited. Like, people are obviously interested in this stuff. So this is an example from myself of that people are interested and they do want to watch this stuff and consume this content, whatever content you choose to create. So takeaway number 2, humans are interested by the bizarre. They're interested by the unsightly and the bizarre and the things they don't know about. And we also need a greater variety of content. I'll get into that in a minute, but there is a big gap in the variety of things out there for people to consume. And so finally, this final question that I have is a really important question for you to ask if you want to do this, is, does this benefit society and does it do good for the world? And this is a really important question for you to ask. So if we go back to these thumbnails that I showed a minute ago, obviously the second slide, if you notice, that hornet is a plastic toy, right? You can tell. And then that third one is just ridiculous. It's obviously a photoshopped out fish. They photoshopped out a fish and added a grasshopper. It's ridiculous, but people watch this stuff. And I think the most important thing you need to ask yourself is, am I willing to sacrifice maybe more views for being truthful, being factual? So obviously you can be hyperbolic in your thumbnails and your titles to get clicks on your content. I do that myself sometimes. But in the content itself, you need to be truthful and factual with everything, because the large demographic of students that currently consume this kind of content are young students, so high school, middle school, and younger. And so they're basically going to believe whatever someone online tells them. So you really need to be careful about being factual and true in everything that you cover. For example, of how fast misinformation can spread, 4% of Americans are self-proclaimed flat earthers, meaning that they still believe that the earth is flat, which is crazy. And 4% might not seem like a lot, but it really is a lot considering how just untrue the whole idea is. Another example that I'm sure you all are more familiar with is the murder hornet, right? So, of course, it's actually called the Asian giant hornet, Vespa mandarinia, and when it was, for a short time, a few individuals were found in the Pacific Northwest, and so the New York Times made an article about it covering that situation, and they called it the murder hornet. And that quickly spread. Everyone started calling the Asian giant hornet the murder hornet, and this quickly became, oh my gosh, it can kill humans, right? And we obviously all know that that is not true. It can't kill a human unless you have a reaction to it or something. But that just goes to show how quickly misinformation can spread online and how important it is for you to share truth in your content. A great example of a science communicator is, of course, Charles Darwin. He had immense hesitation to release his publication before he released it in 1859, and that's of course the theory. His publication on the origin of species. He had great hesitation. He was worried about what the world might do with it or react to it, and of course some of those were for good reason. But in the end, he did release his findings, and that has obviously changed the world. And so his circumstances were obviously a lot more dire and extreme than ours are today with making things online. But he still did it anyway. I mean, this could have ruined his life easily, and he still did it anyway. And so really, if he can do it, you can definitely do it too. If I can do it, you can do it too. So just to summarize, takeaway number one is you have a story to tell online. The world wants to hear your story online, and your story can also change the world if you just put it out there, if you just put yourself out there. So I've been doing that with my podcast, and it's been really great. So please find me after I'm done or at my booth. I would love to have any and all of you on the podcast. It's a really great thing. So with that, thank you very much for having me.